Daniel Carter walked into the wrong restaurant on a Tuesday evening in Manhattan. He had been looking for a modest Italian place where a colleague had promised to introduce him to a potential handyman client, but the address on his phone led him instead to a dining room draped in silk and candlelight, where a single table sat empty near the window. The hostess gestured toward it before he could explain his confusion, and somehow he found himself sitting down. His phone buzzed with a video call from his daughter Lily, her small face filling the screen, just as a woman in a black dress approached the table and stood there, watching him with eyes that revealed nothing at all. Evelyn Moore had arrived expecting a blind date arranged by her father's associates, another suitable candidate from a carefully curated list of men deemed appropriate for marriage into the Moore family. She recognized immediately that the man seated at her reserved table was not the investment banker whose photograph she had reviewed that morning. His clothes were clean but worn at the edges. His hands showed the calluses of physical labor. He was saying goodnight to a child on his phone, his voice soft and unhurried in a way that seemed almost foreign in this room full of whispered negotiations and calculated silences. She should have corrected the mistake. She should have summoned the hostess and demanded an explanation. Instead, Evelyn found herself curious about what would happen if she simply sat down across from this stranger and let the evening unfold. She signaled discreetly to the waiter, a gesture that meant everything should proceed as planned. And then she lowered herself into the chair opposite Daniel Carter and studied him the way she might study an unexpected variable in a quarterly report. Daniel ended the call with Lily and looked up to find a woman watching him with an intensity that made him briefly forget where he was. She introduced herself only as Evelyn, no last name offered, and when he apologized for what he assumed was some kind of seating error, she simply said that errors were often more interesting than plans. He did not know what to make of that statement, so he said nothing and waited for her to explain. The conversation that followed moved in directions neither of them anticipated. Evelyn asked questions designed to categorize him quickly, to determine his profession and his connections and his usefulness. Daniel answered slowly without the polish of someone accustomed to these environments, and his honesty caught her off guard more than once. When she asked what he did for a living, he told her he was a handyman who took whatever work he could find, that he had once been a construction foreman before his wife died, and everything fell apart. When she asked why he was dining alone in a restaurant that charged more for a single appetizer than most people earned in a day, he admitted he had walked through the wrong door and was too embarrassed to leave. Evelyn had spent her entire adult life surrounded by men who lied effortlessly about small things and large things alike. Daniel's candor unsettled her in ways she could not immediately name. She found herself leaning forward slightly, asking follow-up questions she had not planned to ask, genuinely wanting to know how a widowed father of a young daughter had ended up sitting across from her on this particular night. He mentioned Lily again without meaning to, describing how she had reminded him that morning to wear his good shirt because she wanted him to make a nice impression on his new client. The good shirt, Evelyn noticed, had a small tear near the collar that had been mended with careful stitches. Something about that detail stayed with her longer than it should have. She had intended to dismiss him politely after the first course, to send him away with a gracious excuse, and wait for the correct date to arrive. But the correct date never came, and Evelyn found herself ordering a second bottle of wine and asking Daniel Carter questions about his daughter's school and his late wife's favorite memories and the apartment where he lived that was too small, but close to the park where Lily liked to feed the pigeons. By the time the main course arrived, Evelyn had made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who knew her. She had been searching for months for a solution to a problem that had no good answers, and this stranger, with his honest eyes and his mended shirt, had suddenly presented a possibility she had never considered. She set down her fork and looked at him directly, the way she looked at board members when she was about to propose something that would change everything. Daniel had been enjoying the meal more than he expected, despite the strangeness of the situation. The food was better than anything he had eaten in years, and the woman across from him, though intimidating, seemed genuinely interested in his answers rather than simply waiting for her turn to speak. He had almost forgotten that he did not belong here, that this evening was built on a mistake he should have corrected hours ago. Then, Evelyn Moore told him who she was. She explained that her family owned one of the largest private investment firms on the East Coast, that she had been running the company as CEO for the past 5 years, and that her position was now threatened by forces both inside and outside her organization. Her father, Richard Moore, had recently joined an alliance with board members who believed the company needed a different kind of leadership. They wanted Evelyn married to someone from an approved list of candidates, someone whose family connections and public image would strengthen the Moore brand. If she did not comply within the next 30 days, they would initiate a vote of no confidence that would almost certainly succeed. Daniel listened to all of this with growing confusion. He could not understand why she was telling him these things, why she was sharing the intimate details of her corporate battles with a man she had met by accident less than 2 hours ago. Then she told him the rest. She was offering him $50 million to marry her. The marriage would be contractual, bound by specific terms and a predetermined timeline. He would play the role of her devoted husband in public while maintaining whatever private life he wished. After 2 years, they would divorce amicably, he would keep the money, and they would never speak again. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, certain that she was joking, but Evelyn Moore did not joke. Her expression remained perfectly composed as she explained that she had considered every option available to her and concluded that a strategic marriage to an unknown outsider was preferable to surrendering her company to people who would destroy everything she had built. Before Daniel could respond, a woman in a gray suit appeared beside the table. She introduced herself as Margaret Lewis, legal counsel to the Moore family, and placed a leather folder on the white tablecloth between them. Inside was a contract that ran to nearly 40 pages, every clause precise and binding. Margaret explained the terms in a voice that suggested she had done this many times before. The marriage would take place within 2 weeks. Daniel would receive an initial payment of $10 million upon signing, with the remaining $40 million distributed over the duration of the contract. He would be required to attend certain public events to maintain a credible appearance of marital happiness and to refrain from any behavior that might embarrass the Moore family. In exchange, Evelyn would ensure that his daughter Lily received the best education money could buy, and that Daniel himself would never need to work again unless he chose to. Daniel looked at the contract without touching it. He looked at Margaret Lewis with her impassive face and her expensive briefcase. He looked at Evelyn Moore, who sat perfectly still across the table, waiting for his answer as though she were waiting for a quarterly earnings report. He thought about Lily sleeping in their small apartment, about the bills he could not pay and the opportunities he could not provide. He thought about his wife Sarah and the promises he had made to her before she died. Promises about raising their daughter with integrity and love and the kind of values that could not be purchased. $50 million sat on the table between them, and Daniel Carter did not know what to do. Evelyn watched him carefully, reading his hesitation the way she read reluctant investors during difficult negotiations. She had expected him to accept immediately. Men in his position always accepted. They calculated the numbers, recognized the opportunity, and signed their names without looking back. But Daniel was not calculating. He was thinking about something else entirely, something she could not see in his expression. She decided to accelerate the timeline. "The offer expires tonight," she told him. "If you walk away from this table without signing, you will never hear from me again. The choice is simple. Marry me or leave now." Daniel felt the weight of her words settle over him like a physical pressure. He had never been good at making decisions under stress. Sarah used to tease him about it, about the way he would spend 20 minutes choosing between 2 nearly identical items at the grocery store. But this was not a grocery store, and the choice before him was not between 2 brands of cereal. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photograph on his home screen. Lily smiled back at him, gap-toothed and radiant, wearing the paper crown she had made during art class. He had taken that picture 3 days ago, on a morning when everything had felt almost manageable, when the weight of his struggles had briefly lifted, and he had allowed himself to believe that things might eventually get better. $50 million would change everything. Lily could go to any school she wanted. They could move out of their cramped apartment into a real home with a yard and a room of her own. He could stop worrying about next month's rent, stop taking jobs that left him exhausted and broken, stop lying awake at night wondering how he would keep his daughter fed and clothed and safe. But he would also be lying to her. He would be building their new life on a foundation of deception, teaching her through his actions that money was more important than truth. Evelyn's patience began to thin. She was not accustomed to waiting for answers. In her world, hesitation was weakness, and weakness was exploited without mercy. She had made Daniel Carter an offer that most people would consider a miracle, and he was sitting there staring at a photograph of his daughter, as though the decision required actual thought. She signaled to Margaret, who began gathering the documents as though preparing to leave. Daniel looked up and met Evelyn's eyes. He did not look away. He told her he would not sign anything tonight. He told her that a decision this significant deserved more than a few hours of consideration, that he had a daughter whose life would be affected by whatever choice he made, and that he refused to treat her future as a business transaction conducted over expensive wine. Evelyn's expression flickered with something he could not identify. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation, or something else entirely. She told him he was making a mistake. She told him that opportunities like this did not come twice, that men in his position could not afford to be selective. She told him that his pride was a luxury he had not earned. Daniel stood up from the table. He thanked her for the meal, apologized again for the confusion that had brought him here, and told her that if she wanted to continue this conversation, she would need to give him time to think. Then he walked out of the restaurant and into the cold Manhattan night, leaving $50 million and a woman who had never been refused, sitting alone at a table set for two. He did not expect to hear from her again. 3 days later, Evelyn Moore appeared at the construction site where Daniel was working a temporary job. She stood among the sawdust and the noise in her designer coat and her impractical heels, looking as out of place as he had felt in her restaurant. She did not explain how she had found him. She simply said that she was willing to negotiate. Daniel set down his tools and led her to a quiet corner away from the other workers. He asked her why she had come, why she had not simply moved on to another candidate from her approved list. Evelyn admitted that she did not know. She said that something about his refusal had stayed with her, that she had spent 3 days trying to understand why a man who clearly needed money had walked away from more than he could ever earn. She said that his answer mattered to her in ways she could not explain, and that she wanted to hear his conditions before she made any final decisions. Daniel studied her face and saw something he had not noticed before. Beneath the polished exterior and the careful control, Evelyn Moore was afraid. She was fighting a battle she was not sure she could win, and she had come to him not because he was her best option, but because he was the only person who had treated her like something other than a transaction. He told her his conditions. His daughter Lily would never be used as a prop or a publicity tool. She would not be photographed, interviewed, or displayed at any public event without his explicit consent. Her education and her welfare would be guaranteed regardless of what happened between him and Evelyn. She would be protected from the politics of the Moore family and the pressures of their world. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked if that was everything. Daniel said it was not. He told her that if they were going to do this, he needed to understand why. Not the corporate reasons, not the board votes, and the family pressures. He needed to understand why Evelyn Moore, a woman who could have anything she wanted, was willing to marry a stranger she had met by accident in a restaurant. For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. The construction noise faded into background static, and Daniel watched as something shifted behind her eyes. She told him about her mother, who had died when Evelyn was 12 years old. She told him about her father, Richard Moore, who had responded to that loss by transforming his daughter into an extension of his ambitions. She had been raised to perform, to achieve, to represent the family brand in everything she did. Her marriages, her relationships, her friendships were all evaluated according to their strategic value. She had never been allowed to want anything that did not serve the larger purpose. The CEO position was supposed to be her escape. She had believed that if she could prove herself capable of running the company, her father would finally see her as something more than an asset to be deployed. Instead, her success had only made her more valuable, more controlled, Moore trapped. The marriage requirement was not new. Richard Moore had been arranging suitable matches for his daughter since she turned 25. She had refused them all, finding ways to delay and deflect without directly defying her father's wishes. But now the board was involved, and the timeline had become impossible to ignore. If she did not produce an acceptable husband within the month, she would lose everything she had worked for. Daniel listened to her story and recognized something familiar in it. He had spent years trying to build a life according to other people's expectations. His own father had wanted him to take over the family business, a small plumbing company that Daniel had never loved. He had gone along with it until his father died, and the business failed, and then he had drifted into construction work because he did not know what else to do. Meaning Sarah had changed everything. She had seen something in him that he had not seen in himself, a capacity for tenderness and patience that had no value in the world his father had prepared him for. She had encouraged him to be a father when Lily came along, to put his daughter first in ways that his own father never had. When Sarah died, Daniel had promised himself that he would honor her memory by raising Lily with the same love and acceptance she had given him. He would not repeat his father's mistakes. He would not turn his daughter into a tool for his own unfulfilled ambitions. He told Evelyn some of this, not all of it, but enough for her to understand that he knew what it meant to be shaped by forces beyond his control. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that neither of them had expected. They were not allies. They were not even friends. But they were two people who had been wounded by the same fundamental injury. Two people who understood what it meant to live according to someone else's script. Evelyn asked him again if he would consider her offer. Daniel said he needed more time. She gave him her personal number, not the one routed through her assistant, and told him he had 1 week to decide. The week passed slowly. Daniel worked his jobs and cared for his daughter, and tried not to think about the impossible choice that awaited him. She asked him why he seemed sad, why he kept staring at his phone, why he had not been sleeping. He told her he was trying to make a difficult decision, one that would affect both of their lives. He told her he wanted to make the right choice, but was not sure what that meant anymore. Lily thought about this with the seriousness of a child who has already learned that life does not always make sense. She asked him if the decision was about money. Daniel admitted that it was partly. She nodded slowly, processing this information. Then she told him something that stayed with him long after she had gone to bed. She said that money was nice because it bought ice cream and new shoes and trips to the museum. But money was not as nice as having him home at night to read her stories. Money was not as nice as knowing that he would always be there when she woke up from bad dreams. Money was not as nice as being loved. Daniel held his daughter and cried quietly into her hair. And in that moment, he knew what his answer would be. But before he could call Evelyn, she came to him. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. Daniel was taking Lily to the park when a black car pulled up beside them. And Evelyn stepped out, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes that still managed to cost more than his monthly rent. She apologized for the intrusion and explained that something had happened, something that required an immediate conversation. Lily looked at the strange woman with open curiosity. She asked Daniel if this was a friend. Before he could answer, Evelyn crouched down to Lily's level and introduced herself. She said she was someone who needed to talk to Lily's father about important grown-up things, but that she did not want to interrupt their time together. Lily studied her with the same careful attention she gave to everything. Then she asked Evelyn a question that cut through all the pretense and strategy. She asked Evelyn if she wanted to marry her daddy. Evelyn froze. Daniel felt his face flush with embarrassment. He started to explain that Lily had overheard parts of his phone conversations, that children often misunderstood adult situations, that this was not what it seemed. But Lily was not finished. She told Evelyn that if she wanted to marry her daddy, she needed to know some important things. She needed to know that he snored sometimes and forgot to buy milk and got grumpy when he was tired. She needed to know that he made the best pancakes in the world and always checked for monsters under the bed and never broke his promises. She needed to know that he was the best daddy anyone could ever have, and that if Evelyn was mean to him, Lily would not forgive her. Evelyn listened to this speech without moving. When Lily finished, The CEO of one of the largest investment firms on the East Coast, found herself completely without words. Daniel watched as something broke open behind Evelyn's carefully composed expression. She looked at Lily, then at Daniel, then back at Lily. And then, for the first time since he had met her, Evelyn Moore smiled a real smile. She told Lily that she did not want to be mean to anyone. She said that she was actually very lonely and very scared, and that she had been making some choices that were not very good. She said that meeting Lily's daddy had made her think about things differently, and that she was still trying to figure out what to do. Lily considered this answer with visible skepticism. She asked Evelyn why she was scared. Evelyn glanced at Daniel, who nodded slightly, giving her permission to continue. She told Lily that some people wanted to take away her job, and that she had been trying to find ways to stop them. She said that sometimes grown-ups made complicated plans that did not work the way they expected, and that she was beginning to wonder if her plan was one of those. Lily nodded as though this explanation made perfect sense. Then she took Evelyn's hand and asked if she wanted to come feed the pigeons. Evelyn looked at Daniel, helpless and uncertain in a way he had never seen her. He told her that the pigeons were not very patient, and that she should probably come along if she wanted to see them. They walked to the park together, the three of them, and for an hour they did nothing but throw breadcrumbs and watched the birds gather. Lily chattered about her school and her friends and her favorite books, and Evelyn listened with an attention that seemed to surprise even herself. When it was time to leave, Lily hugged Evelyn around the waist and told her she should come back again sometime. Evelyn promised that she would try. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Evelyn called Daniel and told him she was canceling the contract. She explained that seeing him with his daughter had forced her to confront something she had been avoiding. The marriage plan had never been about finding a solution. It had been about maintaining control, about refusing to admit that she could not solve every problem through strategy and leverage. She had been willing to use another human being as a tool, just as her father had used her, and she was no longer willing to be that person. Daniel asked her what she would do instead. She said she did not know. She said she was probably going to lose her company and disappoint her father and face consequences she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. She said she was terrified and that the terror felt strangely like freedom. He told her that sounded about right. The next 2 weeks were difficult for Evelyn in ways she had never experienced. Her father summoned her to a meeting where he made his expectations absolutely clear. The board scheduled a vote of no confidence. Former allies suddenly became unavailable, their support evaporating as soon as they sensed which way the wind was blowing. She could have stopped it, even at the last moment. She could have produced a suitable husband and preserved her position. Margaret Lewis had a list of candidates who would sign the contract without asking questions. Men who understood the value of strategic alliance and did not care about emotional complications. But Evelyn kept thinking about Lily in the park, throwing breadcrumbs to the pigeons with complete concentration. She kept thinking about Daniel standing at the construction site in his worn work clothes, refusing $50 million because his daughter's integrity mattered more than his own survival. She kept thinking about what it might feel like to make a choice that was entirely her own. She went to the board meeting and told them she would not be presenting a husband. She told them she was prepared to accept whatever consequences followed. She told them that she had spent her entire life performing for other people's approval and that she was finished. The vote went against her. Richard Moore sat stone-faced as his daughter was removed from the position she had held for 5 years. He did not speak to her afterward, and she did not expect him to. What she did not expect was what happened next. 3 days after losing her company, Evelyn found herself standing outside Daniel's apartment building in Brooklyn. She had not called ahead. She had not prepared a speech. She simply arrived, carrying nothing but her uncertainty and her exhaustion. Daniel opened the door and looked at her without surprise, as though he had been expecting this visit all along. She told him she had lost everything. He invited her inside and made her coffee in a chipped mug, and she sat in his small kitchen and looked at the crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator and the stack of unpaid bills on the counter and the evidence of a life lived without pretense or performance. She told him she did not know who she was anymore. She said that her entire identity had been built around achievement and control, and now that both were gone, she felt like a stranger in her own body. Daniel listened without offering advice or solutions. He simply listened. The way he listened to Lily when she needed to talk through a problem. When she finished, he told her that losing who you thought you were was sometimes the first step toward finding who you actually are. She asked him how he knew that. He told her about the months after Sarah died when he had felt so lost that getting out of bed seemed impossible. He told her about the slow process of rebuilding himself around his love for his daughter, of learning that his identity did not depend on his success or his failures, but on the choices he made every single day. Evelyn stayed for dinner that night. Lily was delighted to see her again, and insisted that she sit beside her and try the dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets that Daniel had made. They ate together at a table that wobbled slightly, in an apartment that was too small and too modest, and somehow more welcoming than any space Evelyn had ever occupied. When it was time for Lily to go to bed, she asked Evelyn if she would come back tomorrow. Evelyn said she would try. Daniel walked her to the door, and they stood together in the hallway without speaking. Everything had changed between them, though neither could say exactly how or when. The contract was gone. The transaction was over. What remained was something fragile and undefined, something that had no guarantees and no predetermined timeline. Evelyn asked him if he thought she had made the right choice. Daniel told her he thought she had finally made a choice at all, and that was enough. She laughed quietly, a sound he had never heard from her before. Then she left, and he went back inside to read Lily her bedtime story. 1 month later, the three of them sat together in a small diner in Brooklyn, sharing a plate of pancakes that Daniel had not made himself. Lily was explaining in elaborate detail why the dinosaur exhibit at the Natural History Museum was far superior to the ocean exhibit, and Evelyn was listening with the same careful attention she had once reserved for quarterly reports. No promises had been made. No contracts had been signed. No one knew what the future held for any of them. But they were sitting at the right table now, in the right place, with the right people. And for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, that felt like enough. Outside the window, Manhattan continued its restless motion, indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding within its boundaries. Somewhere in a glass tower across the river, Richard Moore was probably planning his next move. Somewhere else, the board members who had voted against Evelyn were congratulating themselves on their strategic wisdom. None of that mattered here. In this booth with its cracked vinyl seats and its laminated menus, Daniel watched his daughter teach Evelyn how to make a tower out of creamer cups, and he thought about all the wrong doors he had walked through to arrive. At this moment, he thought about Sarah, who would have loved this strange turn of events, who would have seen in Evelyn the same wounded courage she had once seen in him. He thought about the $50 million he had refused, and he did not regret the choice for a single moment. Evelyn caught his eye across the table and smiled, that same real smile he had first seen in the park when Lily had asked her difficult questions. She was not the woman she had been a month ago. She was not yet the woman she would become. She was somewhere in between, learning to live without the armor she had worn for so long. So was he. So were they all. Lily finished her creamer tower and looked at both of them with the satisfied expression of an artist who has completed her masterpiece. She asked if they could come back to this diner again next Saturday. Evelyn said she would like that very much. Daniel agreed that it was a good plan. And somewhere in the ordinary miracle of that small agreement, a new kind of story began to take shape. Not a fairy tale, not a transaction, not a contract with predetermined terms, just three people choosing to show up for each other, one Saturday at a time, building something real in a world that too often settled for imitations. The diner hummed with its usual morning noise. The coffee grew cold in their cups. Lily asked for more pancakes, and life continued imperfect and uncertain and exactly as it should. Music,